What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of the Cheeky Midweeky, where we are making strength and conditioning not boring anymore. Before we get into today's episode, please hit the subscribe button, as it helps our show grow so we can reach more strength coaches, better educate them so they can train their athletes better, and all of sport can improve. In today's episode, I am joined by Michel Delcourt, Coach Andrew Mitchell from the Tampa Bay Rays, and myself, and we talk all things fascia. Although we might have different opinions on the proper term or what fascia is and what fascia training isn't, at the end of the conversation, you'll realize we all actually agree, and we're just kind of diving over the minutia. You're going to love this episode, and you're probably going to be surprised about my thoughts on fascia training. Here at Strength Coach Network, we pride ourselves on giving you the best quality information from strength and conditioning coaches and practitioners that still work with or have worked with athletes. This is not theory. We are always about giving you practical information that you can apply day one the minute you're done listening to this. And you can check us out for a $1 trial in the link down below. Click that link and find out more about us. So, Andrew, you're the reason why we're all here, and I appreciate you for connecting us. No, you are. So thank you for connecting us. I'm excited to dive into this. We're going to talk about all things fascia, everybody here, and this is going to be a good learning opportunity for me. I want to make this very clear. I am half the reason why I bought Strength Coach Network was because I want to continue to learn, and this is the best way for me to learn. Yeah. Let's talk fascia. Andrew, you tee it all up.
Yeah, so on this call, we have two people that I greatly respect, and that's you, Justin, and then Michel Delcourt from Institute of Motion, also the inventor of the widely popular ViPR Pro, I think growing in popularity
which
year by
I've
year.
used since 2018. I'd like to preface with that. We've had it at Towson in 2018, bought, I think, 3 different sized ones, maybe 2, but had multiple of them to use with the football team and with the basketball teams.
Fantastic. You're way past the starting point of most people when I introduce them to Michel. But when I was in the private sector at Equinox, I was blessed to train a lot of people, but I also was very fortunate to be trusted as an educator. And so what I would do, I just backed out. So what I would do is that I would work with Michel to learn content on ViPR and fascia, and then I would turn that around and teach that to new trainers and coaches in the Equinox portfolio. With that, I was able to kind of gain Michel as a mentor, and he's helped me a lot on learning things, all things fascia and all things connective tissue. So when you posted that you had questions about fascial training and what it is and what it means, I've had those same questions, and Michel has been great for me in answering them and helping me help other people learn the answer to that question. So I thought there's no better person to introduce you to than Michel.
Michel, yeah, if you could, first of all, let's start with, how did the ViPR get invented? Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, no.
Should have said that before. How did the ViPR get invented? Let's start there, and then you just kind of talk about your journey as well.
That'd be great. Andrew, appreciate the intros. And Justin, nice to meet you. And I was thrilled to be invited to this. So I appreciate your time today.
Mm-hmm.
So, for us, I'm Canadian. I live in San Diego now, which is very different weather-wise. But as a Canadian, you grow up, and hockey tends to, kind of steal a lot of the oxygen in the room in terms of just, bandwidth and focus. And so, dealing with a lot of hockey players coming out of undergraduate and graduate studies, we often took a look at periodization models over the course of the off season, right? So, about 16 weeks from the end of the season in kind of May-ish to the beginning of the season in September, our job was to try to make these athletes stronger in the context of a combative sport. It was to try to get these individuals to have more endurance as it relates to the substrate utilized at, in a 50 to 120 second shift in hockey. And then otherwise more skilled as they, kind of navigate the demands of the sport. And so while we did that over the course of those 16 weeks, what we saw was, in our discourse with the coaches of hockey, we tended to get the feedback that, our players are doing better, they're improving, but they need more strength on the puck. And so we would go back the next season and, try to navigate the periodization models, maybe a little bit more exposure to the strength work, et cetera. And then they go back into sport, and the comments from the coaches would be the same. They need more strength on the puck. And it took us a while, but we ended up asking the question in time, well, who's beating us to the puck? Or who's beating us, our players, when it comes to the combative elements? And they said the farm kids. And for us, it was like, yeah, it was almost, kind of true in the sense of anecdotal evidence that you look at these wrestlers, you look at these, kind of strong individuals just in terms of brute strength, and they tended to be these farm kids. And so that's anecdotally true, right? If I was to ask a wide variety of people, if you took a farm kid and they were to wrestle a city kid or a gym kid and you're a betting person, where's your money? Most of them, if not all of them, would say it's on the farm kid. So the nature of the loading in the farm tends to be slightly different than what we might see in the gym. Not for better or worse, but it might be different. And so as we elevated those differences in our conscious mind, what we wanted to do is try to get a bale of hay in the gym without the mess. And the nature of loading, as you basically interact with a bale of hay, let's say, would be off the midline. It's asymmetrical. It's long under load. You're doing all these things as a task-based measure. It's full body, it's integrated. So we wanted to expose some of our athletes to those demands too. Not in replacing what we did in the gym, because we still believe in the power of that and the efficacy of that, to be sure. But we wanted to expose a little bit more of that in the domain of training. And so that's what we did. There was a rolled up piece of floor matting, 4x4, 4 foot by 4 foot, rolled up like a carpet, put on end, tied in the middle like a tether. And we were lazy enough that it would sat there for about 2 months, and we didn't lay it down on the floor just yet. And then we started flipping it like a tire flip. It wasn't really that, it was about 80 pounds. So it wasn't really a big tire lift or a tire flip, but we did it for some strength endurance. And then we did it in the frontal plane. And then we thought, if we put handles in this thing, we could pick it up. And, that's a bale of hay. So we had a bunch of these made. We tested it with NHL athletes. They went into the sport and they said, we've never felt as strong in these odd positions since loading with this. And so they gave us the confidence to be able to bring it into a market. And at that point, we started to lean more towards scientific rigor as opposed to just anecdotal evidence to understand what odd position loading will do to the nervous system, to the muscular system, to the fibrous connective tissue, et cetera. So that was really our foray into the, kind of the domain of adaptation.
And so anybody listening to that, if you've never used one of the heavier ones, like those things, I'm thinking it was the green one too. Like that green one, I think it might be called the large one, but like you get that thing, we would do some base position rips, or if you would do like a forward lunge and, rip it overhead, or if you do. Vacations are meant for you to be outside doing things that you love and reconnecting with your family and your friends and recharging your battery. It is not meant for you to travel and listen to some coach talk in a conference hall and eat some food that really isn't the best thing that you want to be eating. Take back your vacations and do so with a Strength Coach Network annual membership. When you purchase an annual membership, you're going to get access to our course, Performance Coaching 101. In the subsequent years, it'll renew and you'll get access to 102 and 103. Each year, you're going to get access to 2 NSCA CEUs and 10 CSCCa CEUs. These CEUs will allow you to be able to learn from the comfort of your office. You'll be able to earn CEUs on your time rather than having to travel. Take back your vacations and be able to do this with a Strength Coach Network annual membership. Click the link down below for more information. Like any of those movements, it is heavy and it is hard to do. Like it definitely challenges you to set your core and do all of that. My question within that, in this world that I wrote down about, hockey and soccer hockey and wrestling, isn't it, and maybe this is what our listeners are asking right now too, isn't that just doing accessory movements instead of doing fascia training? Because if fascia is what wraps the muscle and we're lengthening our muscles and we're contracting our core and we're having multiple subsystems on posterior shoulder, torso, oblique, that sling, anatomy train, whatever, isn't that still just muscular training rather than fascia training, since we can't isolate fascia from muscle?
Right. Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And I think that should be the right question. And we had those questions early on as well. And so the way I would analogize this, Justin, would be to think about this as a series of different systems that come together. And you alluded to this before. It's very hard for us to extract and train a system divorced from any other. However, the nature of loading does provide adaptations to a wide variety of different systems. And so the way I might look at it is, if we use the body as the analogy of a car, and the car engine, let's say, was analogous to the nervous system and the muscular system. So there's an action potential that is created intramuscularly or intermuscularly. The force and the rigor of that contraction will send signals down and then elevate the threshold of contraction for the muscle. And so we'll call that the revving of the engine, so to speak, right? So the bigger cross-sectional area of muscle, or the amount of motor units that I can recruit, will rev that engine higher. What supports the entire structure is the chassis of the car, and we'll call that fibrous connective tissue. And so colloquially, we'll call that force transfer proteins. So there was a study done in 2021 where they took a look at denaturing the force transfer proteins, right? The fascia. And so it's predominantly collagen. And so they gave it halofunganon, which is an anti-fibrotic, and they denatured all the stuff around it, right? So what they did is they left the nervous system intact. They left the muscular cross-sectional area intact and all the, muscular proteins intact. And what they did is denature all of the surrounding structure, to your point. And what happened was the strength of that particular segment of the body, that muscle, went down by 50%. And so then the question is, what is strength? Because force transfer proteins are taking the nervous system signal, the muscular signal, and when the muscle contracts, it's got to pull on something. And so if we were just to do regular muscular work, you're going to absolutely have an effect on fascia. But predominantly in the gym, it is going through a certain plane of motion, a repeated element of repetition range. And we know that fascia will adapt in certain domains that are commensurate with the nerve and the muscle, but they love this idea of long under load. They love this idea of directionality that changes so that they can remodel based on mechanotransduction. So it's not as if we think of it separately than the nervous system and the muscular system, but we might over accentuate this idea of isometric load in certain positions, odd position loading, or eccentric loading, because what we want to do is get the right inputs in to create the right adaptation or remodeling of collagen, type 1, type 3 collagen, which we're going to call force transfer proteins. And if we can do that, what we're doing is building the chassis of our vehicle commensurate with, let's say, the revving of the engine.
Gotcha. And so the thing that I wrote down here was like, all right, pennation angle, how like that affecting muscular system, because, okay, the more pennate versus fusiform, the stronger, or the contractile speed ability. If we're going to tap into higher muscle fibers, it needs to be heavy loads to tap into those higher threshold motor units, or fast reps, which, fast reps occur when you're using a ViPR doing a squat or a lunge or a lateral lunge, or the very popular lateral lunge, flip it, like you talked about before, like, it's here, we're going frontal plane, like flip, shuffle, flip. It's kind of gotten really popular, or like it was called pivot because it got really popular from the head strength coach for the 76ers. My goodness, I can't remember his name.
Wright.
Todd Wright. Thank you. But then the fast rep, like doing things fast, going back kind of full circle, Louis Simmons talked about that back in the day with the dynamic effort, maximum effort, repetition effort, building up the chassis, the strength of the vehicle. And the directionality, the collagen, like you said, collagen, well, that's, again, we're strengthening our tendon versus, and the muscle and the collagen, or that muscle strain, the odd movements, eccentric and isometrics. Like, I'm saying all of this because, okay, when I did jiu-jitsu the other day, like even something as simple as this, I was doing yesterday's lift. At the end of my lift, instead of doing regular cable curls, I was doing bicep curls bro style, like in the cable column, just arm up, getting it. And I'm like, okay, I know I had this conversation coming up with you all today, but because my arm was out to the side doing a bicep curl instead of just down in front of me, sure, it's at a slightly different angle. I'm still just getting stronger in that position to resist Americanas, Kimuras, any of the things where my arm is in danger out here. And that's where I'm just like, how is that training the fascia versus you think about the FRC folks where they're like, it's just stuff. It's all the same stuff, whether it's the joint capsule or it's all made up of the same exact thing. So that's where I'm just trying to wrap my head around it and better understand.
Yeah, no, it's great. So if we look at just joint position and then, so let's say your arm was down by the side versus out, abducted to, kind of, and then, out at shoulder height. You're changing the angle. So therefore you're changing the line of stress, and that line of stress is going to be changed relative to, maybe not the bicep relative to the elbow joint, but certainly the shoulder relative to the bicep, so the long head of the bicep, into the shoulder complex. So you might say, how does that affect the muscular system? How does it affect the nervous system? How does it affect the fascial system? Well, if it's all just kind of quote unquote stuff and you're changing the angle, the change of angle is going to change the inputs to the system, right? And so when you change the inputs to the system, is there a corresponding net result on the nervous system? And then we can even start there. And if the answer was yes, because it's in a different joint position, so it recognizes, a different proprioceptive demand, right? Because to the side of the body, elbow tucked versus elbow away, there's a different position in the shoulder. So nervously, the body's going to recognize that. And, afferently, efferently, it's going to navigate its sensory motor integration. Muscularly, the long head is going to be in a different position relative to the shoulder joint. So it's going to be a slightly different position to the muscle. We could either answer that question, yes or no. And then the same thing as it relates to the connective tissue, right? You're changing the angle, particularly at the shoulder joint, in through the bicep, in through the elbow. So if it's all just stuff, it's going to adapt. That stuff is going to adapt to different positions of stress. And we know that through Davis's law in the bone, Wolff's law in the bone, Davis's law in the connective tissue. And so what we do is we say, okay, is it prudent for us to expose our individuals, let's say it's young athletes, to a multi-directional input of force such that the nervous system, the muscular system, joint positions, so arthrokinematics, can all adjust to those different positions and create tolerances, create abilities. That becomes exposure. And that exposure can transfer into a multi-directional event or sport, because we've had the exposure, let's say in the gym versus, and that can transfer into the sport or activity.
Because doesn't it get back to, you still need to do your large, global movements to drive systemic stress, to get growth hormone release. And then these are kind of the supporting building blocks to that, because like you said, okay, within the hockey world, hey, we got to get stronger and faster to the puck. Like only doing these type of movements without a base level of strength is kind of going to be, under training. And then you could say it on the flip side of it. Okay, if you're going to be overtraining and you're going to be neglecting things, if you're only, let's just for arbitrary use say, if you're only squat, bench, deadlifting, cleaning, those movements, you're missing out, versus if you're only doing these weird type of movement positions, what Hunter Eisenhower would kind of call human force stuff, where you're, long lever, then you're also not as physically prepared for the rigors of hockey, because with like a professional athlete, they've had that really wide base of physical development. And then now you can refine them over time, kind of Bondarchuk's pyramid of GPE, SPE, and then eventually, special development exercises, and then the event itself. TeamBuildr has been my trusted source for online software programs for my athletes since 2019. Since then, they've continued to grow. They have this new practice integration where practice planning can integrate with the sport coach. You have your sports science, your AMS, the questionnaires. They've continued to evolve and keep giving you the things that you need. It has made my life easier as a strength coach. I want the same for you. You do not need to keep printing on lift cards. Please, printing on lift cards in Excel, you don't need to do that. If you need help being able to purchase it, they have a pre-written written grant on their website. They're also part owners in the Plyomat with Coach Rich Burnett. So if you need to get a good device that can accurately and validly and quickly get your jump height and ground contact time, so now you can get RSI, Plyomat's a great choice. We utilize that at Goldfinch. Check TeamBuildr. Check them out in the link down below. Please stop printing on lift cards. It's going to make your life easier. It's going to make your athlete's life easier. It's easier to program on the back end. Check out TeamBuildr in the link down below. How does that then work together?
Yeah. Well, I think it's all a continuum. I mean, certainly adding a lot of load well, think about this. There's an inverse relationship between load and degrees of freedom.
Yep,
right?
the heavier the load, the less degrees of freedom, because you're afraid of getting hurt in those positions because you're not strong. Yeah.
Right. So we can increase load as a percent of 1 RM max by decreasing, kind of the degrees of freedom. So if I'm squatting or deadlifting, a large degree of mass or weight, I need to respect probably the sagittal plane, and my degrees of freedom in the joints are going to be limited to probably flexion and extension. And so, so that's one input, right? We utilize that. And so let me just elevate the validity of that method. And I think our industry does it extraordinarily well, right? So we get in the gym, we put a bunch of weight on a bar or, on an external mass, and we load it to the body, and we go through a maximum, as it relates to that position, a maximum effort, and our degrees of freedom are lower. So we should do that. And that exposure is indeed good. The question then becomes, is exposure to the other end of that continuum also important? In other words, do we start to decrease our load so that we can actually open up our degrees of freedom, so that we can expose ourselves to a wide variety of different stresses to incite the remodeling and the adaptations to those types of things? And if the answer is, yeah, we can, then it's a question of how much doses of each, right? Because there is going to be benefit of increasing load degrees and decreasing degrees of freedom, both from just a mass on the body perspective. You talked about this idea of intensity, right, to drive certain growth hormones. So that's all important. If we were to decrease load, that's what farm kids do, right? Farm kids decrease a load generally as a percent of 1 RM, but they increase degrees of freedom because it's a lot of variability on the farm. And that exposure has created and knitted a collagen network within their body, right, in a 3-dimensional way that has increased shape stability. Because when you knit yourself, let's say, a weightlifting suit underneath the skin and in the superficial and deep fascia, that sort of thing creates more type 1 collagen, type 3 collagen, because it's under load. It's under a tension load. And so as you fill the body with more collagen in that 3-dimensional matrix, your body gets more stable. And as your body gets more stable, the nervous system recognizes more stability, and thus can generate more force potentially, because you've got more pre-stress, because the body's under a more pre-stressed system. And the other thing too, with speed, you talked about speed. If my body is more pre-stressed, muscles can turn off quicker because they don't have to stay on because of threat. And so the rate of relaxation could augment potentially because my body doesn't have to rely on muscle to stabilize it as much, because I have, let's say, a strong weightlifting suit underneath my skin because of all the collagen that I've laid down on multiple directions. So this idea of fascia, while it's not extracted from the body, it certainly pairs and synergizes with the other systems of the body so that we can create, in this case, more athleticism.
Andrew, you were going to say something before Michel started going.
Yeah, I mean, when I was first told that I was going to be utilizing ViPR in my programming, it wasn't like this is a tool you could potentially use. It was the conversation that my manager at that time had with me was, this is a tool we need you to highlight because it's on the floor and it makes our gym different. And I was coming in, I was a bigger guy at that time, and every client I had would squat, bench, deadlift, box jump, and get on a treadmill and run fast. I
You
was
are
very
still a
much
pretty big dude for anybody that hasn't seen my man. Like if you see him at any of these coaches, like he's put together. He's like, if you're looking at the video right now, he's got the nice hair, right? But like my man is tall. He's got some broad shoulders. Like Andrew's strapped up, y'all. Don't get it twisted. Don't get it
Thank
twisted.
you.
Sorry.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'll have to make sure that my wife hears this podcast in the future to kind of bolster up the confidence. Um, no, but so I was kind of like, why would I want to use this? I can get people strong and I can get people fast. I'm a CSCS, so I'm obviously like brilliant. I've been a CSCS for 6 months now. Like I know what I'm doing. Um, and I remember when I met Michel and he told me like, yeah, that stuff absolutely works. It absolutely works. When do your clients throw their back out? Because at this point I was training general population. And I was like, I had a guy that could deadlift 375 and he was over 50 years old, but he threw his back out because the Shih Tzu ran into traffic and he tried to catch him. So he reached out and got really long. The dog ran away and he got to this extended position and everything gave. And Michel just asked me, he was like, what would have been the drawbacks of introducing a deadlift in a different position to highlight the strength you had already built in that traditional position? I thought about it and I was like, I don't know if that would have prevented the guy spazzing out when the dog ran into the street. But he said, let's just try it. And so we took the 20 kilo Viper, the big green one that you described, which was a Hoss. He put it out in front of me and he was like, keep your feet planted bilaterally, reach down with your right hand at your side, and then reach crossbody with your left hand, grab both handles, brace, and then stand up and pull it to your chest. I did that and it was difficult for me. And he was like, okay, let's change the foot position. And it was difficult for me again. He was like, now let's take it overhead. It was difficult for me again. So now I'm 5 minutes into my meeting with Michel. I've already discussed how I think we can get just as much benefit out of lifting in a straight line as we can with the quote unquote like funky positions I thought he was going to put us through. And I'm like 5 minutes in, I'm in a full sweat. Fast forward, I introduced these supplementary different plane dead shift positions to my traditional deadlift clientele, who at that point had become some track people, some basketball people. And did we lose them? You back? Hey, Michel.
Hey, it's still recording, so you're still good.
Great. Yeah. But I don't know if you remember this, Michel, but we introduced dead shifting.
Oh, so my hand hit the whatchamacallit, hit my desk, and so for some reason that decided to undo everything that the audio and the video. So, and it's because I was looking up the different sizes of the Viper when you talked about 20 kilo. I was like, how go?
Gotcha.
32 kilo. Good. No.
Yeah. But we had introduced the supplementary like funky position deadlifts to my traditional deadlift programming for myself and for my clients. And we saw great results, not because in isolation, the funkier dead shift is better than the deadlift, or in isolation, the deadlift is better than the dead shift, because it's obviously like athlete dependent and need dependent. But it was just the fact that they support each other because they solve a different problem. One problem is lifting with maximal tension and need to produce maximal force. And the other problem is needing to produce force and tension in the elongated, disadvantageous position. And I think that's where fascial training fits in. And it might just be that the labeling is a little funky for people, but it is, at the end of the day, like strength training. It's strength and power training, but it's strength and power training in these elongated, non-traditional positions, which would highlight the need for strong connective tissue more so than being able to do it in a straight line. That is what I was going to try to say before. Michel said very similar things in a much more like eloquent and research-backed manner. But that's my relationship with fascial training.
Based off what you said, them supporting each other. And I think you did hit the nail on the head, because I think maybe that's what I'm so hung up on is like they both support each other. And you're right. Like dude, you want to talk about hamstrings, glute, low back, like that entire lumbothoracal region just getting lit up when you even do, and you can tweak it a million different ways. You put that Viper in front of you and
Yeah.
you do the lunge to the deadlift pickup, and then you put lunge down and you put it down and then get out of there and then lunge in, like, so you can lunge and reach and hold on to it. You can lunge, place down, get out of it. And you can do all those different.
And you're not describing anything that's impossible to do with dumbbells, kettlebells, or barbells. Right. Where the Viper comes into play is that it's functionally designed to allow you to do that safely with either a singular athlete or a small group of athletes or a large group of athletes. It allows us to accomplish that without having to have barbells potentially being like rolled around and moved about the ground. You know, like if you think of yourself, for example, like, you know, you complimented my size. You're a pretty big guy too, right? If I'm tall and big, you're taller and bigger. But going from your football experience into the world of jiu-jitsu, like I can imagine what that must have been like, what that must have felt like on your body to introduce.
Hawken Dynamics is my preferred choice for force plates and for handheld dynamometers. Made in the USA, up in Maine, I have been using them since 2020 when I was at Towson University. Still use them at Goldfinch today, and I brought the plates to the high school that I've trained at. We will use the plates and transport them when we train athletes at the many different high schools that we currently work at. As I said, they are a handheld dynamometer as well with the True Strength. You can assess athlete internal, external rotation, hip, AB, adduction, calf strength, hip, whatever you want to assess, you can do with the True Strength. It also has the ability to pair with the difference striking machine. So now you can see single strike, multiple strike. Check out Hawken Dynamics down in the link down below.
New planes of motion, new demands, but like you still got to be strong and powerful.
1000%. You know? And I did, and I even put it on Twitter. I was like, I in no way, shape, or form have like my years of hang clean or power clean been like, yeah, this is helping me take down guys or do anything in jiu-jitsu, because like I'm not getting into, I mean, we can dive down the fact of when you tackle somebody or do anything like that, it's not even triple extension, it's maximal isometric contraction followed by relaxation, and then you continue to run. For me, again, the thing that I just keep getting, again, you're right, I can do it with a dumbbell, I can do it with all of that, but it separates and spreads the mass out, almost like a J-bell feels better to bench than a dumbbell because it's just like part of your hand and you're moving it. My whole thing is like, I'm still training my muscles. So how is it like,
right?
But then I'm like, okay, it's fascia. Why is that fascia training? But as I was talking, it's like, okay, if I was trying to think like neuromuscular development of like, is neuromuscular development when I'm doing, you know, fast jumps over hurdles or I guess it's just, that's what I'm starting to wrap my head around and fumble over my words. So I'm starting to potentially learn and understand it better. I don't know.
Yeah. And here's my question, and I think Michel would have a better answer for this because I'm actually like struggling to answer this own question for myself. But is it called fascia training because in that longer lever, in that length under load, are the needs for the weightlifting belt under the skin greater than the needs for it if you're in the traditional like bilateral sagittal stance? Right. Could that be why it's considered? Is that why the dimmer switch on fascia is turned up a bit more when you're in these odd positions? Because it's just more demanding to have co-contraction against that tissue that's woven in between everything.
Yeah, I think you raise, first of all, Andrew, kudos to you. I mean, I think you've highlighted a couple of different things that I want to reiterate. Number one, and Justin, I think we're all in the same boat. Like, how can you isolate anything and call it some singular thing?
Right.
And Andrew, you said maybe it's a misnomer. And I believe it is. Like when we say, you know, let's say we're going to the gym to train muscles, right, for aesthetics. Well, we would all sit here and go, are you just training muscles? I mean, you're certainly training a lot of different things, bone density, nervous system kind of activation. There's a lot of different things going on, but we just assign it to muscular training. And I think the mistake here, and hopefully this maybe clarifies it for all of us, is it's not just fascial training. You know, call it multi-directional training, and then have a dose of multi-directional training with load and linear training with load, because the advantages of both of those things. So what we're doing is, and I think some of the arguments is, man, we do so much linear stuff in the gym. Is it overplayed? And that's maybe a discussion for a different day. But I think we'd all agree, if we're training an athlete in a multi-directional, chaotic sport like jiu-jitsu, football, etc., hockey, we definitely need some exposure to these positions in space in order for it to transfer. Because think about it the other way. If we never did it, we just trained in a certain way, and then the sport is played in a variety of different ways, and they never had exposure to that, would playing the sport be enough to just create those adaptations?
Some people do say that there is, like, that, where they're like, hey, you're just going to do stuff in the weight room. They don't really believe in specialized exercises, because this stuff that you're talking about kind of sounds like Dr. Yesis's like specialized exercises to get stronger in those. And so it's like, I agree with what you're saying.
So the question is, well, if that was the case, just playing the sport should elicit the demands that are necessary for the sport, then why go to the gym and even train in the gym? Because what we want to do is overload the nervous system, overload the muscular system, in this case, maybe overload the fibrous connective tissue system as well, so that we can create and place stressors on it that are, let's say, out here, and then the sport is played within a smaller context. And so we have the ability to overreach because we've trained it in, a training conditioning off, kind of outside of the sport environment.
And it kind of falls into dynamic correspondence stuff then too.
Yeah. And so what we're doing is we're increasing the demands placed on it, and everything should improve in that analogy. So Andrew, you kind of identified this, let's just not call it specialized fascia training. Let's just call it an exposure to load in a variety of different ways. Right. So I think that would be maybe the first one. And the dose response, we want to get a dose response of each of these things. Then you, I think rightly said, is the dimmer switch, do people kind of assign fascia to it? Because is that the rate limiting step? When I reach out at a certain distance in length, and the nervous system can tolerate it, the muscular system, but is the rate limiting step the fascial system? And the dimmer switch increases on that. And that's why people assign it to it.
Powerlift has been my choice for strength and conditioning equipment ever since I got into the field. Right now, I still have their racks, I have their barbells, I have their bumpers, specialty bars, and we have the IMTP device at Goldfinch, and it's been great for us because it's allowed us to free up the rack where we used to have to do the IMTPs. Now we use that IMTP device, roll it around, we've created more space. You have to check them out. Doesn't matter if in your college, high school, pro, tactical, or private, they have the ability to make whatever customizations and whatever adjustments you need. I was a part of the weight room that was the 32 brand new rack facility at Iowa football. You see what they did for TCU football. Doesn't matter how big, how small, whatever your customizations are, Powerlift is number one in the exercise equipment space for a reason. Check them out in the link down below.
To fascial training. To some degree, that is true. So if I go long under load, like a farm kid would, right? And I'm placing a mass, not just in the midline of the body, but I got to place it somewhere because that's the task of life, right? I got to put something somewhere. And I take a load and I place it somewhere. That lengthen under load does achieve a strong input to allow the fascial system and the nervous system too, and the muscular system, but certainly the fascial system, to remodel in a certain way. So when we go long under load, the eccentric idea will increase certain elements that will allow for remodeling. One of them is lysyl oxidase, which is an enzyme that increases cross-linking to collagen. And it expresses itself 10 times as much when you go long under load than you would kind of short under load. So I'm not dogging on bodybuilding here at all, but bodybuilding is not really interested in that. It's interested in a cross-sectional area increase. So it highlights it doesn't accentuate the long under load. It'll go back to a neutral position, which is a lengthened position, and then it'll concentrically produce force. And the repeated stress of that will create cross-sectional area increase because of the loading mechanisms, the rep schemes, et cetera. And that's all useful. When we go and we accentuate that long under load, particularly with isometric holds, then it starts to remodel intramuscular collagen and tendon collagen in a way that starts to build the chassis of the vehicle. Now, do we still get a corresponding really good result on the nervous system and muscular system? Sure. right? So we'll just call it kind of long under load training because the entire system will benefit from that. Not exclusively. We're not forgetting about all the good stuff that we've done historically to create bigger, stronger, faster athletes, because that works. What we're doing is we're dose responding a additional, let's go 3-dimensional, let's go long under load, because in sport, what are the most prevalent injuries? As a person gets higher and higher horsepower to their nervous system and muscular system, the exposure of soft tissue injuries goes up. And the soft tissue injuries would be musculoskeletal injuries, which are kind of interesting because they're rarely of the muscle and they're rarely of the skeleton. They're mostly of the tendinous, kind of the musculotendinous junction, 88%. Based on research, they indicate that is the disruption, is at the musculotendinous unit. That is where you start to get basically a breakdown in the system. So a lot of that is due to a tendon not behaving and responding with enough dynamism, and then the system kind of tears and breaks. And so we want to be able to train different velocities, to your earlier point, Justin, and we wanted that tissue to be resilient enough and responsive enough to rev the engine without breaking the chassis in this analogy.
Question somebody might be having when you talked about like the injuries to the site, when there's a musculoskeletal tear, is there a tear in the fascia as well?
So are you talking about, let's say, describe a musculo.
Let's say I'm sprinting and I got shot by the sniper. So let's say it's high hammy up near my butt, right?
Yep.
Is that just bicep fem that gets ruptured when go under imaging, or will fascia get ruptured as well? And this is going back to thinking to Jake Tura's images that he's shown of fascial webs on cadavers.
Yeah. Generally, it's going to be at the high hammy, it's going to be at the musculotendinous junction. And so if we look at a tendon, the question is, what is a tendon? Well, a tendon is a continuation of the perimysium, the epimysium, the endomysium being spun into a more concentrated unit. And then that then attaches to bone, but in reality, it attaches to the periosteum of the bone, which is the covering of the bone, which is an extension of the tendon on the other side, and particularly the osteogenic layer. So periosteum has 2 layers to it. It has a fibrous layer and an osteogenic layer. Actually, I misspoke. It attaches to the fibrous layer. So in one analogy, you could say that the tendon is the covering of the muscle and is the covering of the bone. It's just an extension of it, right? So in our classic example, or kind of our mental model, there's a muscle, and then there's the tendon, and then there's the bone. But in reality, a tendon is the continuation of the muscle because it's the covering of the muscle, and it is the continuation of the bone because it's the covering of the bone. Because it comes out of the mesoderm, and the mesoderm during developmental grows faster than every other thing in the body. So it just starts to wrap around everything. And then things like bones and organs grow into fascia and push it, or into the mesoderm and push it. So there's a continuation of this collagen network in the body. And so when we have an injury to that area, it's unlikely that you're going to rip tendon from the bone. It's very unlikely that you're going to rip the tendon itself. It's more likely that you're going to strain or rip the musculotendinous junction, because that's the weaker area. Specifically, if we didn't train different speeds, different loads at different angles, because that end of the tendon gets stiffer. And when it gets stiffer, it doesn't comply as much. And we want some compliance when we're doing high velocity stuff like sprinting, et cetera. So a lot of people grab that bite in the top part of their hamstring because they don't have, let's say, that viscoelasticity of the tissue. They've lost it, let's say, because they're sitting on their hamstrings too much, or they're not training in a variety of different ways, i.e. speeds and i.e. loads, to be able to increase the adaptation that they want from that area of the body. Oh, can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Justin.
So when it does rupture, let's say whether it is a hamstring, bicep, calf, pec, when there is that muscular strain, or anybody just, hey, they get a strain and it's not like they're out, is the fascia also damaged, or does that show up on imaging? Vitruve has been my choice for VBT for years now, not only because of the encoder and how well it works with the app, and you can film movements with the camera and get live variable feedback in real time if you so choose to on the app, but the fact of the amount of content they have been pushing out to help coaches better understand VBT. It's not only just to move the bar faster. You can be working on what's the appropriate load for high rep sets based off velocity loss. You can be looking at velocity loss threshold between sets, in between reps. VBT is not just moving the bar fast. It's moving the bar fast with heavy weights. It's not just moving lightweight fast. And Vitruve has been at the forefront educating coaches on VBT and how to do it the right way. Check them out in the link down below. Again, forgive my ignorance.
No, please. It's great questions. Yeah. So the fascia will get damaged to a certain degree, and it's that connection between muscle and fascia. Another thing of note here, Justin, too, is a lot of times we feel it in the hammies. And the question is, or the calf. And the question is, why is that? And the answer is somewhat complicated, but when we sit on our hamstrings or we sit for too long, let's say an athlete off of a plane ride that's coast to coast, and their ankles are in a certain position, what we have is we start to have, particularly in the fascial structures, we start to have loss of water because we're sitting on stuff that is pushing water away, and water circulation is through osmotic pressures, right? Pressure gradients. So I'm pushing water away. And then I'm closing a joint angle and kind of keeping it there. And so what happens is when there is loss of bound water in fascia, two things happen. We lose dynamism, right? So it starts to get less elastic and it gets stiffer and more fibrotic. So that could be an issue. The other one is when we start to assume a joint angle that is the same, it starts to lay down, even over the span of kind of 5 hours, it starts to lay down certain elements within the fascia that make it stiffer. And so sprint coaches would always be able to tell if their athletes, particularly their female athletes, were wearing high heel shoes the night before, because they would hear in the track a different level of foot strike into the track as they ran around. And so we tend to set ourselves in postures, even acutely, and that setting is not through the muscular system, it's not through the nervous system, it's largely through the kind of the collagen network of the body, because that is the organ of support, right? It's not muscle. Muscle is pulled pork if you just remove all the casing of it. It doesn't provide that shape stability. It contracts to give us resting tone for sure, but it's highly, extensible. It's highly elastic. And so it tends to be, if I get, let's say, an injury, what happens in an effort to, if I, let's say separated my shoulder, in an effort to stabilize that area, a bunch of different macrophages go in, they start laying down collagen, right? Fibroblasts go in, they start laying down collagen because they want to set that area. What do surgeons do now? They don't get you in a sling for too long. They get you out and moving as quickly as possible, because what they don't want is fibroblast activity to lay down collagen without lines of force telling it where to lay down, because then it's just like felt. And felt is sticky and gunky and gluey, and I can't move it. And so lines of force will tell fibroblasts where to lay down collagen, and the directionality, and then even, the dynamism of this, because, there's elastin, there's reticulin, there's collagen. These are all fibers that are important. And so we know that in the healing process it takes place, and obviously in the training process it takes place too. And so, we want to have those inputs set up right so that we can have the necessary adaptations in all of the systems, as you both rightfully mentioned, including, let's say, the fibrous connective tissue, which is fascia.
Anybody that's listening this far, they're like, all right, hey, how do I do this the right way then? Does it matter to call it long under load, weight training, fat? Like, what are some of the key principles?
Great. I would say this. For us, anatomical adaptation is not necessarily doing the same linear patterns with a different rep scheme. For us, anatomical adaptation is exactly what you said. Can I go long under load? Can I do it in a variety of different angles? Because what I want to do is I want to create a strong nervous system that can actually understand joint positions in a variety of different ways. So I can grow my neural net, heavy in learning, right? I can also create a muscular tolerance in 3 dimensions, knowing that muscles are task-based. And so I'm going to give them a wide variety of tasks so that they can be strong in different positions. And then the fascial system, it wants to remodel 3-dimensionally, or at least I want it to remodel 3-dimensionally. So here's a recipe. I want to take a view of sagittal load, frontal plane load, transverse plane load. Okay, I can basically bucket it in 3 elements. And I can go in and I can hold a lengthened position, a long under load position. And if I want tendon and intermuscular efforts to remodel, I can reach an end range, whatever that means for me in my sport. And I can go out there and hold it for around 10 seconds. And I hold it into an extended position. And I do one in the sagittal plane, one in the frontal plane, one in the transverse plane. And I might do that 10 times. So 10 seconds, 10 times. And that will start to create a response in the nervous system, a response in the muscular system, and certainly a synthesis of collagen in those lengthened positions to make my chassis of my body strong. And if I want to do that in one phase of periodization, anatomical adaptation, I can. If I want to do it every time I warm up and just grab, let's say 5 minutes and do this kind of loaded mobility stuff, this end range stuff where I pause, then we get into the effects of stress relaxation and stress shielding, which we can talk about. But, these types of things start to knit collagen into the body. And it doesn't necessarily take that long. It's just repetitive exposure to this over time. So if I just add it in my warm-up, then I add it in my warm-up.
Let's talk about the stress shielding. Go ahead, Andrew.
So if this is kind of a plug for past Strength Coach Network episodes, if you're listening to this and it sounds very familiar, just in a different lens, it's very, very, very close to what Kyle Salmons is doing with his respect to like internal forces of the connective tissue in his like Beast Factory setup. So, Kyle Salmons, he's done a great job of having respect for exposure to internal forces of connective tissue in the rehab setting in terms of like single joint training. And then Michel's programming guidelines, which he can explain much further in detail, is more respect to like internal forces and like multi-joint movement. In preparation for this episode, I went back and reviewed some of the stuff that like Kyle has talked about on this show, and messaged him a little bit on Instagram as well, just to pick his brain. And I asked him flat out, I said, Kyle, would you consider yourself a fascia guy? If you take all these definitions.
Dasher has completely changed the game for how I'm able to time my athletes, whether I'm doing ACL, max velo, or curvilinear running. Had the blues, had the blacks at Goldfinch. Now that I have the silvers, this has saved me so much time in setup, breakdown if I'm going from Ankeny to Huxley, or from Ankeny to the Nevada location, or Nevada to Huxley, like wherever I got to go time athletes, it has made my ability to go from one place to another so much easier with the silvers. Strength coaches that have to go from one field to the other, or from the field to the court, this will help you save time. Now, in the spirit of saving time, you also have the ability to have an API interaction with TeamBuildr, so now you can see all the data on the back end. Seeing data on the back end, Dasher has a free app, a player profile app that will allow athletes to see their data. Over 6,000 coaches and athletes have done so. And if you want more than just the timing gates, if you check them out in the link down below, they have solutions to help you out with vertical jump, broad jump, RSI, all that. Check them out in the link down below.
You take the definition of fascia. Are you a fascia guy? And he put it really well. And I think it's kind of like a summation of everything we've talked about so far. He's like, I'm not a fascia guy, but I understand how connective tissue works. I understand fascia's relationship in that function. Which I think is an important thing for like all coaches to take away. It's like, you don't have to be a guy. You don't have to be like the fascia person, the muscle person, the jumping person, the conditioning person. Like it's a complex machine that, and similar to what Michel said, like the tendon is a continuation of other tissue that we don't consider the tendon. The the fibrous connective tissue on the bone is a continuation of the tendon, which is a continuation of tissue that we're not calling the tendon. It's all interconnected. And so siloing it and being like, this is one type of training and this is the other and this is the other, and believing that we can truly like isolate stuff is like a bit too reductionist. I would encourage all coaches to like listen to this and then go listen to another programming conversation and see where it fits, and then listen to another one and then see where it fits, and start like building a web of relationships. And you might realize that you might not be a plyometrics person, but you've been doing plyometrics. You might not be a fascia person, but you might have been doing fascia. I think just the more I listen to Michel explain what it is, the more I remember about other people and other coaches I've heard explain things as well. And I'm like, well, that's similar to this. That's similar to that. It's just a different lens, which hopefully more coaches can start to maybe think that way too, because then it's not so like my school versus your school, but more so like, how are you training the human body? Sick. I would love to share how I train it. Yours plays soccer, mine runs track. How do those relate? The conversations, I think, really blow up once you start seeing things through that lens.
Michel, the stress shielding stuff that you were talking about?
Yep. So obviously stress shielding and stress relaxation, we first learned from Keith Barr, and we went to his lab at UC Davis a few times to see what he's doing. And he grows tendons in his lab. So, every native form of collagen is the same. The phenotyping is going to be the stress that you place on it. So he basically puts different stresses on native and tropocollagen to see what happens. And so when we impose demands on the collagen matrix, it starts to differentiate, right, into type 1, type 2. Type 1 is more resistant to tension. Type 2 is, a resistance to a squish. So it's got more hyaluronin in it, more lubricin. It's more squishy, more water. And so that's great. And so what he was saying is, if we take a tendon and a certain part of that tendon has a thickness to it or a strength to it, a lot of times that'll shield the weaker part of that tendon, right? So the load will go through that strong part and it'll keep getting stronger, and the weaker part won't get enough pull to create the right inputs to lay down more collagen, right? Because it needs some sort of, kind of mechanical load to induce cellular remodeling. It's called mechanotransduction. So that's stress shielding, right? The stronger part will shield from the weaker part. In order to alleviate that, stress relaxation would say something like, if you take an Achilles tendon and there's a weaker part and a stronger part due to injury or just what have you, if you put an isometric load of tension on it and you relax in that, so there's a certain degree of creep, fascial creep, that starts to, and about 10 seconds, 20 seconds, somewhere in there. If you impose that tension stress, the strong part will effectively tire, or there'll be some sort of fascial creep, and the load will, at a certain point in that 10 or 20 second hold, will more evenly distribute over the entire, let's say in this case, tendon sheath. And so what you'll get is an even distribution of tension, whereby the fibroblast can then remodel along the line of stress. If you're holding a tension load in the Achilles tendon, it's going to be straight up and down more in that sagittal orientation. And so it starts to remodel along those things. And so stress relaxation would be going long under load. If you're thinking about tendon, the weight needs to be around 70 to 80% of, the tolerable load. If it's intramuscularly, like long chains of anatomy, it tends to be more 40% load that is necessary. And you're going to hold that position for in that 10-ish seconds range. And that is going to create a tension load on the system whereby type 1 collagen, type 3 collagen can remodel. Effectively, you're knitting yourself a stronger chassis in the body. And so this is, research that is done by Keith Barr, Robert Schleip, and others in Europe that are looking at these effective ways. Now, going back to what you both just said, and I want to reiterate this is not fascial training. This is, the muscles are going to get a corresponding result. The nervous system is going to get a corresponding result. And so we're just now going long or low three-dimensionally to get a strong system of the body. You're going to definitely turn the dimmer switch up, Andrew, as you analogized before, in the fascial system when you start to do these types of things. And Keith Barr, based on his stress relaxation, has, rewritten the Achilles tendon rehab protocols for the NFL by introducing, his theories on relaxation, stress relaxation.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I'm looking at a article from September 2023. We had a kid rupture his Achilles in October of 2022, and we went through and helped him. No, he ruptured in 2021. I printed it in 23. This was the 22 season that he got back. Yeah, we did those isometrics because, like you said, I had a big fan of Jake Turris stuff, and the stuff I wrote down was because he's so heavily influenced by Keith and Ebony Rio and the stress shielding, because there is still such good healthy tendon, and you have to lay down that collagen and orientate it that way. So that's why I'm really glad that we were able to all get connected, and like nobody was like, "Oh, you're an idiot! Like you're a dumb Justin idiot! Like you don't get this stuff!" Like because we're all doing the same thing. We're just kind of calling it slightly different.
100%.
One of the guys that is at his name's Joe Bramer. He owns. He's one of the co-owners of the jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai place or kickboxing place that I'm at. And he's like, he trained with Martin Rooney, and Martin Rooney's like, strength and conditioning. He's like, it's just like eating at a Mexican restaurant. He's like, he goes, the joke about eating at a Mexican restaurant is, you go and I'll get a taco. Oh, what's in a taco? It's a tortilla, it's some meat and some cheese. Okay, can I get an enchilada? What's in that? Well, it's a tortilla with some meat and some cheese. Hey, can I get a burrito? What is that? Well, it's a tortilla, it's a burrito, it's meat and some cheese, right? Like we're all doing the same. And so maybe like, I guess it's, the terminology and stuff. So that's why
it is indeed that. And I want to get away from this, fascia versus this versus this versus this. It's how does load, we could have a discussion on how does load impact blood volume? And we'd say, well, load, when you introduce load, there's plasma volume expansion. And so that's really, it affects everything, including your blood. Now, the interesting thing about connective tissue is connective tissue remodels slightly different than other tissues because it has an extracellular matrix. Now, blood is connective tissue because it has basically serum and then plasma, and plasma is the ECM, the extracellular matrix. And under load, interesting things are done to an extracellular matrix within connective tissue. Fibrous connective tissue is fascia. But I completely agree with your perspective, Justin. It's not about training one thing in isolation, which is impossible to do. Mm-hmm. It's about a broad understanding. Andrew, referred to this earlier. It's about a broad understanding of what is going on within each of the structures when we start to impose different demands of training. Whether we're doing a deadlift, you're going to get fascia contribution in a deadlift for sure. Whether you're doing multi-directional dead shifting, which is, shifting a mass from a dead position, right? Starting strength. But we're not just going up in a field of gravity, we're going through a field of gravity. We call those things dead shifts. Each of these types of things are going to contribute. And so far as we know what we're doing, we can overload the system within constraints. We can overload the system within training and conditioning. And that should be the focus, not what are we calling it and what camp are we in? We're throwing grenades in another camp. It really, we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, which is how do we bring about overload, or let's say overreaching and then recovery, overreaching recovery, because then there's super compensation, there's the adaptive process. We keep that in place so there's no involution. And we understand, let's say, what's happening to the nervous system, what's happening to the muscular system, what's happening to the fascial system and beyond, joints, skin, pressure in cavities like hydraulic amplification. And we understand the relationships that exist between each of those systems, because that's the real magic in my mind. The reductionist theory is good to understand things in its constituent parts, but we will never understand how a car goes forward and back until we understand the relationships between all the systems of that car and how they all influence each other. Then we understand how that drivetrain turns the wheels. And so I think it's very true to the body as well. If we understand the relationships between each of these systems, then I think we'll have a better understanding of how we can impose the demands, how those stresses can result in adaptation, and how those adaptations can maximize performance, whatever that performance may be.
Amen. No better spot to wrap this up, where everybody is aware we're all on the same team and we're calling things slightly different, but at the end of the day, it's about getting your athletes as good as you possibly can. Andrew, Michel, I greatly appreciate your time today.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, Justin and Andrew.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Michel.
Thanks for watching that video. If you enjoyed it, click right here for videos just like that, and make sure you click here to subscribe to our channel. Have a great rest of your day.